Okay, Ironman, UTMB, what do I really think? Now, I want to just approach this angle. There's a purist in me that just wants to rock up to a cross-country race, pay £2, rock up to a fell race in the UK, pay £2 and run over 8 miles and just try to beat everybody for the sake of a book or something like that, which is #1 prize. There's the purist in me that wants that. When you get into the sport and you realize, and you kind of take a step back and realize that who we're competing against in athletics or in running, and especially in distance running, and especially in trail running, very, very, very difficult to cover a trail race. We've got drones, we've got runners who can, hold a camera that's now got the technology of a gimbal, so it seems pretty steady. We've got the coverage, we're starting to get the coverage, and it's only gonna get better. But even if you love running as much as I do, you have to be honest about this. Watching a marathon, it's not interesting. It's not interesting. You might be able to sort of see Eliud Kipchoge running and think, is he going to break 2 hours? It might be interesting to watch that for a portion of time. You're probably going to watch the highlights. Most of you are probably going to watch the highlights. You might watch the last 20 minutes to see if he's going to get there or not. You might be like me, who's like, okay, see what time he gets to halfway in, and then I'll tune in. It might be like that. It's exactly the same with the Tour de France stage. Most avid cycling fans, I'm talking crazy cycling fans, who will stand there for hours and hours and hours on a Tourmalet, they won't tune in for the first week of the flat stages because you know it's going to end up in a sprint finish, and it's the last 2 to 5 kilometers that are going to make the difference. That's it. So how do you make running interesting when it's like that? Even marathon running, which is only 2 hours at the sharp end, how are you then going to make a 10, 20-hour race like the UTMB interesting? How do you do that? When you're competing against sports like the UFC, the fastest growing sport there is, cage fighting. When you're competing against football, which is hosted and televised in, I think, every single country in the world. The money's there because of the amount of people that are interested in, because the outcomes in football, what can happen at any given moment in American football, in ball sports, but in football and the big sports that are really popular with most countries, cricket as well, massive money in cricket now, especially in the Indian Premier League, anything can happen at any time. And so you might have the top of the league versus the bottom of the league, but who knows on the day? With running, it's very predictable. Even if you're watching a 5,000 meter race, even a 3,000 meter race, a 1,500 meter race, if you're watching a 1,500 meter race, you know that first couple of laps are going to be pretty steady. People are going to be holding back. Third lap, people are digging in. Last 300 meters, people are going for it. That's usually a 1,500 meter race. So why is it interesting to watch? Unless somebody's going to try and go for the record. And even then, I would argue, is it interesting? Is it interesting to see, if the world record's 3:30, is it interesting to see somebody run 3:29? Is it interesting, a 1,500 meter race? I would argue that it's not interesting. In the same way that a marathon is not interesting. It's not interesting. So how do we make the sport interesting enough to get enough eyeballs into it that aren't just consumers of the products, so they aren't just other runners, but we get bigger spectatorships? How do we do that? And you have to make it interesting. The way that Ironman has operated, and the way, can't remember the year, but I remember tuning into Kona World Championships in the Ironman and spending the first hour watching swimming caps bobbing up in the air, bobbing up in the water, just bobbing. And I don't know who's in first place. I don't know any of the athletes. I don't know what's going on. I'm just waiting for them to get on the bike so they can actually do something that I can understand. That's how I was thinking. But when you break it down to what was happening, and I was still watching 8 hours later, 8 hours and a half later, to see who came first, second, see who fell apart, it was because they broke it into stories. And it wasn't just stories about the elite men or the elite women. It was stories about the people that had managed to get there. It was stories about a guy from Turkey who was doing the Ironman, for the first person in Turkey to do the Ironman. It was a story about somebody who had had a massive car accident or had cancer 3 years ago and had managed to make the start line and now was trying to get it finished before the cutoff. All those stories were pre-recorded interviews that were well placed at a time when there's nothing much going on. We're on the bike for 4.5 hours, 5 hours. So what do you want to do? Do you want to see those wheels going along the island of Kona for that amount of time? Is there anywhere in the world beautiful enough to keep you captivated for that long? I know that my favorite races in the world, my favorite running races, Subito a Pico Valletta and Il Paso Torres, some of them, two of the most beautiful races I can possibly imagine. I cannot think, unless you had the pre-recorded interviews, how you could keep people interested for 7, 8, 9 hours, and for Subida or Pico 4, 5, 6 hours. I don't know how you could keep people interested. You could definitely record it. They're road races, so you could have people on scooters, have people on motorbikes, exactly the same in the Tour de France. You could have drones. You could kind of like, you know, zoom out and see just how beautiful what you're running up at Subida or Pico Valletta is. You could see that. You can appreciate the beauty. But are you going to tune in? Is the non-runner going to tune in for 4 or 5 hours to see who wins and to see what the stories are? Without those pre-recorded interviews, and Ironman do that really, really well, it's just not happening. There's too much competition out there. There's far too much competition out there. Football, American football, basketball, UFC, so many sports that have a dedicated fan base. Why would they switch to watching somebody run along the streets of Berlin or run along the streets of London for 2 hours or 2 hours, 2 minutes? Why would they do that? So how are you going to make UTMB up in the mountains at Mont Blanc and the mountains that are surrounding Chamonix? How are you going to make that interesting? When runners are going ridiculously super slow because they're running for 20 hours or 24 hours, how are you going to make that interesting? You might say, okay, we'll look at the next descent or whatever, but you've got to keep the audience captivated in order to get more eyeballs on the sport, in order to get more sponsors interested, in order to give the participants or give the elite runners more of an incentive, more of a money incentive in order to do that. We just saw at the weekend some crazy event in Saudi, some Spartan race or something like that. $480,000 or something like US dollars has been given out as prize money. They understand in Saudi that people are incentivized by money. The whole of the Middle East does. Do I think that's sustainable? No. Eventually they're going to realize that this is not interesting enough in order to warrant those types of prize funds. But they're trying it, and they're trying it with cycling, and it's working. Cyclists are enjoying going to the Tour of Oman, enjoying going to the Tour of the UAE. They're doing it with the boxing. They're doing it with the UFC. But in boxing and UFC, those fights, no matter who's the top dog, no matter who's the underdog, they can end just with one punch. And so the level of excitement that's literally got you tuned in like that is mesmerizing. And remember, we're even with the UFC, if I kind of log in the next day and I go to YouTube and I want to see a big fight that's happening, so the UFC 300 is coming up, even I, as somebody who's really into it, who really wants to see and really enjoys the discipline, the technique, and the multitude of skills that like a mixed martial artist needs, and at that level, even I will not watch a 15 to 25 minute fight. I'll look at I'll look to, unless it's somebody who is my favorite fighter, like Khabib is already retired, unless somebody like Nate Diaz is fighting, because we live in an age where whatever we want entertainment wise is just a scroll away. And if as soon as we're bored, like you've probably logged off from this video, because the next one's there. It's already there. It's already telling you as you're watching this, look over there. There's something more interesting. And you're already there. So in a world like that, when you've got people complaining about Ironman, there is a lot of positives there. Yeah, as Killian and Zach have said, it needs to be done in the right way. But what is the right way? Is there a blueprint for the way that this should be handled? And what we are forgetting as well, and it's really, really important to say this, and I was in Chamonix last year, during COVID, they were close to bankruptcy. UTMB was close to bankruptcy, and apparently eventually got the funding they needed from Ironman. So Ironman has saved UTMB. For what, if I'm wrong there, let me know in the comments. If I've been told that wrong, which I had from people on the ground at Chamonix, and remember, everybody in Chamonix benefits from that race week. And multiple people were telling me that this was almost dead, and now look at it. And to me, I was there. I made a video. You can find a video. I'll try to maybe put a link underneath. I thought it was a circus. It was exactly what I don't like about running. But is it right for the sport? If you argue it's not, then I think you're thinking about yourself, and you're not thinking about the long-term benefits of the sport, which is, for me, looking at professional athletes, whether they're running 20-hour trail races or whether they're running 1,500 meters or a marathon, looking at that and making sure that they are up there so that children can see them and children want to get in the sport. That widens the base of the triangle. It gets kids active. I don't care what sport kids play, as long as they get into sport and realize all the values, all the lessons that you learn from sport. You can grow up without a father or a mother, but if you get into sport, all those life lessons are going to be learned, so you have a shot at life. You cannot underestimate that. It's so important.